Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Monday, April 9th, 2018. I am Dave Biddle. Very happy to be joined by Patrick Murphy. Patrick, we're going to get a chance to interview Ohio State's running backs as well as the very affable running backs coach, Tony Alford, one of my favorite guys to interview on the staff. That'll be today after practice, around 11:30 probably. Could be as early as 11:15. But our first time really meeting with the running backs this spring, and there's going to be a lot to talk about. But what are you most interested in hearing about today, either from Coach Alford or one of the players? Is there a certain burning topic that's on your mind in regard to the running backs?
I don't think there's anything specific, but I do think this is a position group that's kind of been under-talked about, for lack of a better term, this spring, just with everything else that we've talked about as much as we have, specifically quarterbacks and the linebackers. Obviously, with running back, we don't have anything new really. Master Teague's obviously there, but you've got the three guys that were there last year all returning, and J.K. Dobbins, Mike Weber, and Antonio Williams. So there's not a ton of maybe the storylines that we have at some of the other position groups, but I do think this is still an interesting group. We saw from the beginning of spring practice and what we've seen that Antonio Williams is making a push to get some playing time. Now, I don't know if he's going to jump over either J.K. Dobbins or Mike Weber, but he's obviously impressed. Coach Meyer brought up that he did well in winter workouts early on, and it looks like he's getting rewarded for that. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of where they stand, and then just what the plan is for the running backs going forward. We saw last year J.K. Dobbins obviously dominate the carries. When Mike Weber came back, they sort of had a rotation, but I don't think they ever exactly figured out what they wanted to do rotationally. I'd like to get a better sense of maybe which guy will be used in what capacity. I think you've seen around college football that having 2-3 running backs can be very effective. So I just kind of want to know where they're at with all that and what the approach may be as they head towards the fall with so much talent in that room.
I feel like we can't talk enough about the quarterbacks, so we'll move on and talk about the quarterbacks now. I've almost been trying to even if we've brought it up, I've always been conscientious of I don't want to just completely beat this story into the ground. But it hit me. I mean, here we are. You almost can't talk about it enough, especially when you look at the way Urban Meyer has handled it as far as what he said publicly. And I think there's probably maybe a lot more truth to what he's saying publicly than what some people believe. Now, is it really dead equal between Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins? There's no way. They chart everything over there. I mean, every pass, every rep in practice, everything you're doing. So one guy's got to be at least a little bit ahead of the other. But I don't mind Urban Meyer for not saying that. But it's just so compelling that here we are. The spring game is Saturday, 5 days less of spring ball, and they're saying publicly, they don't know who their leader is at quarterback. They're certainly not proclaiming a starter. They're not even saying who the leader is. Just what do you make of that? Do you feel like they know who the leader is, they're just not telling us, or you think it's really just too close to call at this point?
I agree with you in the sense that, there probably is a guy who is, a little bit ahead. It's hard for me to believe that it's split between, 2 or 3 of the guys, but I don't know if I think that it's concerning that maybe no one stepped up. I think that we thought coming into spring ball we'd have a better idea by this point of just maybe who's the leader now. I know they weren't going to say anything, but from things we've seen or from talking to maybe some of the other guys, just getting an idea that one guy has taken that step, and maybe not to be the starter, but maybe to be the leader, and has just kind of shown himself to be the replacement for JT Barrett in some sense. Maybe I could be wrong, and it's not going to be an issue that these guys really are just competing that heavily, and this could carry over into the fall potentially, and then you get the best guy for the job. But I hope you don't get a situation where they go through this quarterback battle this spring. Well, let's just say, for an example, that Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins and Tate Martell are all back in the fall, and then you've got something similar to like what we had in 2015, where no real guy steps out and emerges, and we get to the start of the season, and they're trying to still piece together who's the starting quarterback. I think that didn't work back when Cardale Jones and JT Barrett battled. I think that there was never, although Cardale Jones was named the starter for the Virginia Tech game, it was never very clear that he was the for sure starter. And I just don't want to see something like that happen again. I think you need one guy. So I think the fact that we're still so far away from games actually mattering means that this is an okay spot. But it would be nice to get a sense, at some point, who will be that guy, who's the leader for the team. And I think the team needs that. I think it's tough to now go into summer workouts after spring practice ends, where it is so much run by the players, and you don't have that quarterback, especially because they've had JT for so long, a guy who really does take over as that leader. I think that would be important to at least get a sense, for the players to have a sense of who that guy is.
Yeah, and I mean, do you see? I know anything's possible. I'm not saying you're going to say there's a 0% chance of this, but is it realistically possible in your mind that all three quarterbacks are going to be on this roster this fall? Do you think one of them is going to transfer this summer?
I think we keep pointing to Joe Burrow as the guy who's going to transfer just because he can do the graduate transfer. And when we talked to him earlier this spring, I got the sense that he really was focused on this spring, that he really wanted to try and win this job. He's an Ohio guy. I think it would mean a lot to him to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. But I do think he also realizes that there's this potential out there. And, when he talked after the bowl game, he was open about the fact that he knows that he can make this graduate transfer and get a shot to play. Obviously, he has a dream of being an NFL quarterback, I imagine. And if he's going to do that, he probably needs to play some college football, and more than he's going to as a backup. So, I think the most likely scenario is that Joe does transfer. With that said, I do think that if he gets the sense that, he is close and he's got a legitimate shot to win this job, that he could come back. It's also possible, I guess, that he comes back in the fall and transfers later on, though I think that would be a mess to try and do logistically with trying to win a job that way. But, yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine so much talent coming back when a guy has an option like that. But when that guy, is an Ohio guy and has wanted to be a quarterback for the Buckeyes like I think Joe has, then, that's maybe the reason I could see him deciding to stick it out and continuing this fight for the job.
And another topic that, I know Ohio State fans would probably just drive off their cars off the road if we even talk too much about this, but I've heard other people opine this. I got to throw it out there to you. Is there any chance they could do the dreaded two-quarterback system? If it's really that close, they push it into the fall, all these guys stick around, and let's say it's Haskins, not to take anything away from Tate Martell. Let's say it's Haskins and Burrow. They're so close they can't make a call. Do they go at least in the opener? I think you have to have a quarterback by the TCU game. But Patrick Murphy, do they perhaps – is there any chance they could do a two-quarterback system?
I guess so. And that's what I was kind of saying earlier that I was worried about. If really neither guy has stepped up, do they go with that? Obviously they didn't do that as much with Cardale and JT at the beginning, but, and I just think that's so difficult to do. And obviously Urban Meyer's done that before, but I don't think that you have such difference in terms of the players in Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins like you did with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow way back. I think that's a bigger problem to have than to pick one guy. From a leadership standpoint, from knowing the offense standpoint, I mean, we've talked before about how this offense is going to change some regardless of or whoever's running it. If it's Dwayne, there's going to be less quarterback runs. I mean, I'm sure there'll still be some. If it's Joe, you can do a little bit more like they do with JT Barrett. And if it's Tate, I think you're going to see even more quarterback runs. So, I think they need to have an offensive game plan in place. And I think running multiple quarterbacks out there as potential starters kind of throws a wrench in that. Now, maybe you can get by with that for the opener, maybe the first couple games you're still really trying to figure something out, but I would really like to see them at some point name a starter even before the first game, so everyone knows who's the starter. You can dictate the offense that way and have everything set as you go into the 2018 season.
We're going to hear from Urban. We'll hear on the Big Ten teleconference this week, but as far as in person, we'll get him after the spring game briefly. Last thing, the quarterbacks, before we finish the show with a little quick talk about Ohio State basketball recruiting. But I don't think he's going to say anything more after the spring game. He'll be asked about it, 5 different ways. Do you have a leader now after the spring game? And I'm sure it's going to be something like, we need to evaluate it. We're still in the evaluation process. We need to watch the film from today. I'll be shocked if he names a leader after spring ball, this Saturday. And, that to me, that's somewhat disappointing. And then we're going to meet with him early next week as well, of course, Patrick. Hopefully Monday. That's tentative right now. But a week from today, we are scheduled to meet with Urban Meyer. I don't think he's going to name a leader then either. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would be surprised given the approach he's taken so far if he named one guy as being ahead coming out of spring practice. It just doesn't make sense in my mind given that he's been so mum on it, whether it's because they're so equal or because they just don't want to say anything. And because of the situation with Joe Burrow. I do think that they'll sit down with Joe, as he talked about earlier this spring practice, and, sit down with Joe and his family and give them their thoughts privately. But I just don't think it makes sense to publicly do it at this point unless you were going to do that throughout the spring. I think it makes sense to try and carry this over to the fall and, go from there.
All right, hoops transfer season is in full bore right now. It's the Buckeyes landed a transfer yesterday, C.J. Walker, a point guard transfer from Florida State. He will have 2 years of eligibility remaining, but he has to sit out a year. He's your traditional transfer. He's not a grad transfer. A solid get for the Buckeyes. He was a really good player off the bench for the Seminoles. They're sixth man of the year, and they played a pretty deep bench, so he was basically a starter for them. But good get there, solid. Not a guy that's going to be a star, but I think C.J. Walker was a good get. Again, he has to sit out the 2018-2019 season. That gets him up to 11 scholarships, Patrick. And Chris Holtmann is going after grad transfers hard. He's in on a lot of guys. I want to focus on a couple that have come up in recent days. We've talked about Joe Cremo, the Albany shooting guard. He can really fill it up, averaged 18 points a game last year. 6'4" guy. He really shoots the three well, and he's of course would be a graduate transfer, could come in and be eligible right away. The other kid, this name just popped up, Nick Norton, point guard from UAB, another kid, grad transfer, would be eligible right away. Nick Norton has been described to me as basically kind of like an Andrew Dockich, but better. He's not going to be a guy that's going to come in and fill it up as a scorer, but he's a better ball handler than Dockich. He's a savvy player like Dockich. So I think for the listeners out there, I think the important thing to point out here is they need grad transfers. They're not going to land some type of superstar, but I think Chris Holtmann now, he's not just going to land one. I think he really wants to land two, and that would get them up to 13 scholarships, Patrick. That would obviously be the full allotment of scholarships, and it would not negatively affect the future as far as recruiting because these guys would be just in the program for 1 year. Let's say they land Norton and Cremo. That wouldn't affect then the 2019 recruiting class because those guys are just taking up a scholarship for 1 year.
Yeah, and I think that's key because, obviously you want to be able to, you don't want your program based on graduate transfers every year. Obviously this is a unique situation with Chris Holtmann coming in when he did last year and taking over the program. But, I think ideally you'd like to really start building through your, freshman classes. But I think, especially with a guy like Norton, they need point guards. C.J. Jackson was better than expected last year. Obviously, Andrew Dockich was just better than expected as well, but he's gone. But C.J. Jackson isn't a true point guard. They, got in some situations, and it was less than I actually thought coming into the season, but they got into some situations where they needed a late ball handle, a guy to handle it, late game situation, and there were times when that hurt them, and even in the NCAA tournament, I think had they had a guy who was a little more dynamic, a little more comfortable running the point, maybe they take care of Gonzaga and move on to the second weekend. Maybe not, but I do think that certainly helps, and we've seen, countless times in the NCAA tournament what having such a talented ball handler or point guard can do for you. With that said, they also need scoring with Keita Bates-Diop, headed out the door to the NBA. And I think now you're looking at potentially a guy in Joe Cremo, if they can land him, that can, put points on the board. At least he did at the level he played last year. So I think that's important. They're going to need, somebody to step up or somebodies to step up and score. And, that should help with that. But, yeah, I think both of any of these moves, and C.J. Walker obviously won't affect them until the year after, but certainly be a help down the road. But I think right now you need points, whether that comes as a starter, comes off the bench, and you need a point guard. So if they can land a couple guys, then all of a sudden we're talking about, hey, this is a team that could maybe surprise some people again in the Big Ten. Obviously, they weren't expected to do as well this year. They managed that schedule very well. I do think you won't creep up on people. You need to have a little bit more talent going into Chris Holtmann and his staff's second year. So it's good to see that they're trying to sustain this. It would be easy for the staff to ride on the wave of such a good first year and have kind of a okay second year. And know that you're still building and whatnot. But I like the fact that they're going out. They're trying to get these grad transfers. It's very clear that this is a coaching staff that wants to continue to be competitive every year, and they're going to do whatever they can to land guys like Walker, like Cremo, and so forth.
Great stuff from my guy Patrick Murphy. He, the guy gets up early on a Monday morning after going to Vegas for not really a bachelor's party per se. We don't need to get into the specifics of that. Kind of like a bachelor's party. He's got a friend that isn't married that he wants to go to Vegas until he ends up getting married. So they're basically cheating. They're doing all of these bachelor parties when it's not even a real bachelor party. But Patrick Murphy, that's the type of guy he is. Weekend in Vegas, gets up early on a Monday to help me out here. So I appreciate it, my friend, and I appreciate all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. Again, we will interview Ohio State's running backs and running backs coach Tony Alford today around practice around 11:30 a.m., so keep it locked to Bucknuts throughout this afternoon for coverage. Appreciate you for listening, and let's hear that Buckeye swag. Best damn band in the land.